Cast is produced by Back Roads of Illinois Production. Welcome to the Markets Club. We're glad you're here on the Markets Club podcast. We have John Payne out of Advanced Trading in Quincy, Illinois. He will be with Advanced Trading with Tommy Grisafi, Connor Bremen, and Brady Huck. Congrats to him about his new job in Advanced Trading. And we were going to talk with Phil Flynn from Chicago Board of Trade. We were talking about geopolitics and on the spending bill in Washington, D.C. Lastly, we were talking about the fertilizer prices on this podcast with Mike Castle from StoneX for Fertilizer Division in Kansas City. Yeah, we were going to talk about geopolitics and on the spending bill with Phil Flynn. I asked myself on the geopolitics. We have money to sold out for ourselves in the United States. The United States has fallen apart in here for right now alongside with wars and inflation. What the heck did you forget about our leadership of our country? That makes me mad at Congress and the president. Please stop sending out of money to other countries and please stop by spending on our taxpayers. This is your commodity markets update on Back Roads of Illinois. Corn futures finished in down 8 to 9 cents for today's close. Soybean futures finished in up 2 to 4 cents for the beans markets. Wheat futures finished in down 2 to 3 cents. Now that we are going to talk about the livestock market for today, live cattle finished in up 2 to 4 cents per weight. Feeder cattle finished in up 2 to 4 cents per weight. Lean hogs finished in down 8 to 9 cents for today's close. Okay, we were coming with John Payne out of Advanced Trading. Stay tuned.
All right, I'm ready.
Welcome back on the Markets Club. We were talking about the commodities markets with John Payne from Advanced Trading in Chicago. However, he's going to be in Bloomington, Illinois with Brian Basting.
That's right.
Hey, I want to go to say congratulations on your new position for Advanced Trading with Tommy Grisafi and the gang.
Thank you very much, Cesar. It's been a long time. When we first started to talk, I knew this was in the works, and I've seen the work you've been doing with Tommy and other guys as well. I think you're fantastic, and you bring a really good perspective, and I'm super excited to be working with them. I think Advanced Trading is in a position of growth right now. I was with a company out of Brazil before, and it was a very nice learning experience, getting to work with Brazilian farmers. I learned a lot about the country, the culture, learned about Argentina as well, how farming works there, and kind of changed my perspective on the world a little bit. But I'm American. I work with a lot of Americans here, and I felt like it was best for my career to stay with to move to a company that was based in the Midwest. So I'm very excited and ready to talk to you again today.
Let's start with our conversation about your sources for Brazil's soybean production from the state of Mato Grosso and Paraná. Did you get your response to the beans?
I did. I asked around. So the bean crop's pretty much out of the ground there for most of the country. They've planted their second crop corn, but the beans, I think it's pretty well documented where they are. Somewhere between 145 and 155 million metric tons in the case of the countrywide production for soybeans. I think that they had a difficult growing season in the corn a year ago. That didn't happen in the beans this year. Beans it was a little bit of a difficult story for more southern Brazil, but Mato Grosso in general did very well, as did most of the areas outside of Paraná. Paraná represents probably 15%. It might be a little bit wrong there on the numbers, but not a huge number. So at this point, I think Brazil has supply. That combined with Argentina having a good year brings a lot of South American production back online. And then you have China, which is, and we'll get to that, I'm sure. Demand is weak in China. And so that kind of gives them some slack with supply. But basis is very good there in Brazil right now. So farmers are selling. And then a lot of them are borrowing money from companies like HedgePoint and StoneX and the big players down in Argentina and Brazil, and then selling new crop for next year. So that's why I think is keeping the price in beans somewhat depressed in those deferred markets and not allowing the board to follow the basis.
Yes, it was pretty decent, but not so good in Argentina with the pest.
Yeah, that's kind of come out here recently. I don't know how difficult that's going to make production getting to market. Argentina's got a lot of different issues, and I think that's probably the big takeaway I've had from doing this over 15 years is like there's always issues. It's never perfect, and right now Argentina has issues. They're hoping to solve them, but with those solutions are going to come second order effects that are going to prevent farmers from wanting to sell. And I think right now, the one change from the old regime where they were kind of messing with their exchange rate and funding, the economy with capital is now they're going to need to fund the economy with sales. So I think you will see the Brazilians start to sell a little more aggressively here, even with the problems they have in production this year from the pests. I do think that it'll find the market in the short run. In the long run, maybe more in a year, we'll have that shortfall. But in the near term, they need to raise cash flow, and I think that's where they'll need to come from with selling soybeans and corn.
John, could you explain to our listeners about these commodity prices for right now, alongside with wars and inflation? China demand.
Well, I think the war question is in my opinion kind of deflated at this point. I mean, not speaking of the Gaza situation, the war in Israel, I don't think that matters so much right now. I think maybe the Red Sea problems, but I think the U.S. Navy has that under control from what I've heard. And the war really in the Ukraine is the one that you have to kind of keep an eye on. And I feel like those in the media and the press have kind of ignored it now. I mean, there's a whole lot of things to cover. You can't cover everything. And that war is slowly, I don't say in World War I style, but it's very, very quietly moving. We'll fall back into more of the main corn regions. So I think at some point, the worry I have for buy side, traders, and I know you have a lot of sell side traders listening, this would be good for them, but buy side buyers would be, if there's another run towards the center of the country again, and a lot of this supply gets put back into threat, prices could certainly inflate very quickly. You see the way the wheat markets have traded over the last couple of weeks. We've seen up until 3 days ago, KC wheat went from basically 560 all the way up to 550 or 650, 660 almost. And now it's basically back down to 620. But, that kind of move can happen in corn and beans. We just need a reason to have it happen. So that could be war. I think the inflation side is more to do with like the price that the end users are getting for their goods, meaning like if the price of a box of whatever product that uses corn is now higher by 20-30%, well then those folks have that much more profit margin to pay for corn if it's higher. So I'm not trying to oversimplify it, but I kind of think before COVID the floor was, we'll call it 320 to 350. Now I kind of think the floor is 420 to 450, and the highs might be in the mid to low fives. Whereas in the days prior, it was mid to low fours. So I think a run, I'm not counting on it. I don't have a crystal ball, but I would be ready for a move. So I'm going to probably have to pull from a lot of the folks that have read it. From what I heard, it's kind of it's a very nice package put together for farmers, and ethanol producers can certainly participate in this new renewable fuels world we live in. The problem is that there's going to come a cost, and that cost will come with like making sure they're producing, and I'm using air quotes here, clean energy, using clean energy, using processes that are quote unquote approved. And so if folks want to sell corn, I think this will probably be a theme as we move forward into the future, maybe not immediately, but over the long run. Folks like Brazil, let's say you're a Brazilian Brazilian ethanol producer, and you need to source corn from the United States. Brazil will say, hey, we're not buying anybody who doesn't, grow corn the way we feel they need to grow corn that is meeting our standards. And that, in my opinion, is a game changer if folks want to be a part of this. Now, I think that's, that's more of a long-term game. I think in the short run, I don't think it changes much. I think it kind of supports the argument I said before. We have low, kind of a new floor in the corn markets, near the $4 price point where before it was $3. And I think that can hold over the long run. I do think you'll see if we need ethanol production for, air.
Is there anything would you like to go to tell our listeners about the livestock markets and today's close about the bird flu?
Well, the bird flu, it's always been a problem. It's just now kind of bleeding into the dairy markets and the beef markets more so than I can recall in the past. So avian flu, HN1, the folks, I work with some turkey producers out in the East Coast, and they always count on it. Like they're saying it will happen. It'll hit the flocks. It really hurts the ability for us to raise production. I wrote an article this week in Farm Futures magazine, kind of about how the investment sector of the world is really looking for kind of a shortcut to produce protein. They don't want to have to deal with the problems that come with dealing with live animals. We'd rather have the meat itself than the animal. The animal is kind of a byproduct to a degree. It's an ugly thing we have to deal with. We'd rather just have the meat. So let's cut out the animal and just raise the meat. Well, that's not really possible at this point on a scale point. So you're having these viruses set in and hit, the ability for producers to increase production. So we have high prices. It doesn't take a genius to go to the market and see chicken, chicken breast, I think it was like $8 a pound at my store. And I think you're probably buying a T-bone steak for closer to 15 to 20. And so, those are things that should encourage more production. If people are willing to pay those kind of margins for animals or for meat or for a steak, then we should grow more. But it's very difficult. You have the flu, you have, the EPA, you have logistics, you have Prop 12. I mean, we have all sorts of things that are kind of getting in the way of really ramping this production here in the United States. So the question is, are we willing to import it from places that, don't do things the way we do, like Brazil, for example. So I think for me, the livestock markets are supported by the fact that numbers aren't going up. We're seeing essentially a smaller hog herd. We're seeing smaller cattle herds. We're having the avian flu with poultry. And so, the question really is, can we afford these prices right now? And that comes down to like more so in the economics of it with the Federal Reserve. And I think we're speaking right around 1 o'clock. So I'm not sure exactly what the rate meeting said, but from my perspective, we're not at any point where we need to cut rates. Like prices are stable, they're going up to a degree. We don't need to have lower rates to try to slow anything, to boost anything at this point. So for me, I think we're supported here. This isn't usually the time you want to sell livestock in May. May is usually a good time to buy seasonally. Now, past performance is not indicative of future results, but that would be, I think, the attitude of a lot of folks at this point in very, very short run.
Next up to SF on the hogs production. I hope not.
Yeah, that would be a disaster. I mean, we have the one thing about this country, and you can say a lot about the United States, but the U.S. livestock producers, and I'm going to speak specifically about hogs, do a heck of a job of keeping virus out. We've seen it in Russia, we've seen it in a lot of Eastern Europe, we've seen it in China. The ASF problem has not hit us yet. And I say yet because a producer, I used to work with a guy out at JBS who would tell me, he's like, it's coming. And this was back in 2018, 2017. It's coming, and it hasn't. Knock on wood, Cesar. I'm knocking on wood. We haven't seen it.
Do you have any final thoughts about these issues in the agricultural sector, world events, and ethanol production?
Well, I could talk for hours. I don't want to bend your ear too much, but I think right now, we're in a decent spot for feed grains. I'm not expecting a huge rally here in corn and wheat, but the potential is there for folks who use corn to make money, because that's really what you use. You use corn to put it in ethanol, you put it in an animal or some sort of industrial use. If the earnings are right, we're making money. I will say we got a little bit of a bellwether yesterday with McDonald's. McDonald's earnings yesterday were not great. Revenue down a little bit. Same store sales down. And that, in my opinion, I'm not saying it's the poorest place to go eat, but it is a place where a lot of lower income folks go to get their nutrition. And it's getting expensive. And I think we're kind of hitting levels here on the livestock side, meat specifically, that is going to find it difficult. And I'm talking about beef and poultry. That highlights pork. So I went to a conference was a couple months ago, and the gentleman said that we're seeing all sorts of buying ahead of beef. And it's to me, I scratch my head. I'm like, we're trading $300 choice. Why are we buying ahead here? We should have been buying ahead a year ago, 2 years ago. And I think that's the case for pork right now. Pork is cheap relative to the rest of the meat sector. And I kind of feel like folks who are in the quick serve business and folks who feed it need to pay attention to that.
Are you serious? Oh boy.
I'm serious. Serious a heart attack. I think pork is something you should look at. Start eating more pork.
Thanks, John.
Thank you for having me. Cesar, it's a pleasure as always. I'm always happy to come back on. Let me know if you need anything.
This is John Payne from Advanced Trading in Chicago. We were coming back with Phil Flynn from Chicago Board of Trade, and we'll talk about the fertilizer prices with Mike Castle from.
It's great to be back. Thank you for having me. Yeah, we're over at the Price Futures Group, as well as a Fox Business Network contributor, and mainly following all these crazy commodities that we've been dealing with.
Welcome to the show. How are you guys today?
Thank you.
Let's start with our conversation about the economy and politics. Crazy inflation rate from JP.
I agree. I think we're in a very interesting situation. Some people are saying we're going back into a 1970s-like stagflation environment. Washington doesn't seem to know how to fix inflation because they're doing everything they can to cause more inflation. Whether it be more regulations, more taxes, more government spending, they are the biggest culprits in this inflationary spiral that we continue to see. And people have to realize when it comes to inflation, governments create inflation. It's not the private sector. So when you hear from politicians who like to blame the private sector for gouging prices, the reality is that Washington creates this situation. And sadly, right now, it seems like President Biden is pushing through new regulations on energy, on building houses, and all of these things are just going to make prices go through the roof. And I'm sad for the American people because they're the ones that are going to bear the brunt of this pain.
The Republicans and Democrats are their fault.
Yeah, I think there's a blame to going around everywhere you look in Washington when it comes to spending. The thing is that how do you rein in the spending right now? It's not by giving away, free checks to college students to pay off their college loans, right? It's not by imposing regulations on businesses. It's not by spending money to somehow solve racial injustices or tear down racist bridges or things like that. I think we have to come together and realize that the government is not Santa Claus, right? He's not, he's not there, with a big sack on his back to give away goodies. I mean, his job, of course, is to order the common of defense and the general welfare of the economy. And they've lost their way, and we're paying the price for that with higher inflation.
Phil, what is your sources for the spending bill in Washington, D.C. between the Republicans and Democrats? Could you explain to our listeners?
Well, I think when we talk about the spending bills, we know we're spending too much, right? And when we put together this bill, everybody's pet projects were in there. There's been criticism, of course, of the spending for Ukraine. There, of course, more support for Israel, which is definitely needed. But there's a cost to be paid. And, you know, some of these crazy regulations and the waste in these bills that gets padded into it, that's where the pain really happens. And until we can weed that off and be honest about it, that's the main thing. You know, I think we need a press that honestly reports on the impact of this, not to, you know, take a side, Republican or Democrat, but just look at the real impact of spending. You know, we're supposed to have a nonpartisan, you know, congressional budget office that comes out with the reality of things. And, you know, sometimes we need to get back to that. We need to look at the reality. And I'm afraid we've lost a lot of sense of reality in Washington when it comes to policies. You know, too many times we have people just, you know, going into their, you know, their little base and work through that. And at the end of the day, they really don't understand the pain that they're causing. You know, they think they're trying to help people, but they're really hurting people. But I think you're seeing that in the poll numbers. You know, when you look at people asking the question, is the economy going in the right direction? Are we better off now than we were 4 years ago? And the answers are overwhelmingly no. And you know, we can make our arguments like the politicians, oh, the economy's really better. People just don't know it. Well, let me tell you something. They know it. They know how far their paycheck is going. They know that inflation is out of control. And they know they have to change their lifestyle because of what's going on. And they know that that wasn't happening a few years ago.
Yes. Tell Congress. Like, you know, young people to trying to find a new home.
Yeah, it's difficult. I mean, this is one of the more difficult times, right? And the prices of housing continue to be very strong. And the materials to build a house, just in the last couple of years, the material costs have gone up dramatically. You know, in some places where you can build a house, maybe $220 a square foot, you might be paying, you know, 400 or 500 in some of the more ritzy areas, and even the lower cost homes are going to be going up dramatically. And this is a problem. We're starting to run into a housing shortage. And this is a country right now that's the richest in the world. And we look at our homeless population, it's through the roof. And sadly, you know, the government, you know, is to blame for a lot of this growing the way it is. And you know, it's by putting resources in the wrong places. And when you do that, you know, when you look for the government to solve all the problems by writing a check, that if that were the prescription to heal the economy and heal our souls, we could have done it many years. But we know historically that's not the answer to the question. One of the best ways is free market capitalism, stimulate the economy, give tax breaks to everybody, promote growth zones, right? But taxes and regulation aren't the answer. Yeah, do we need regulations? Sure we do, but not burdensome regulations. We need smart, quick regulations. Even the Biden administration is acknowledging that we have to streamline, you know, the approval of projects. You know, they put on these tough regulations to approve drilling for, you know, oil and gas. Well, their green energy projects get caught up in the same stuff. So that's the lack of progress. When the government, listen, in a game, you need a referee, right? But you don't want the referee to control the outcome of the game, right? Unless you have money on that team, then you're okay with it. No, I'm just kidding. But, that's the government, right? They need, they need to be a referee. They need to, but when the referee starts getting out of control, that is not good for anybody, and it's not good for the economy. And I think that's what we're seeing. We've got a referee that's gone crazy, and more regulations. And I'm worried. This is what I'm worried about. President Biden is shoving through everything he can as far as new regulations into the industry, talking about more bans on U.S. oil and gas production, all of these things. I think he's throwing out everything he can because he's afraid he's not going to get elected again. So I think you're going to be careful what they try to slip in over the next few months, because I think they're going to be hitting, throwing as much stuff against the wall to see what sticks and what will stick around.
How about Trump with his plans?
Listen, Donald Trump needs to reverse, Joe Biden's plans, right? Joe Biden, if you want to know the difference between the Joe Biden economy and the Trump economy, you're seeing it, because when Joe Biden came in, he reversed everything Trump did, right? When it came to sanctions on Iran, tough sanctions on Iran, he turned away from that, right? He had a good relationship with Saudi Arabia. He turned away from that. He reversed all the border policies, right, that Trump had in play. He threw that out. Executive orders on oil and gas. He got back into the Paris Climate Accord to save the planet. He isn't saving anything. He's costing everybody more money. He's making things less efficient. He's hurting the American people because these are short-sighted policies. It's do-gooding policies. Like, look at me, I'm so great. I'm saving the planet. I'm spending billions of dollars a year. I'm pushing in wind farms. I'm going to take your stove out of your house. I'm going to, not build any more natural gas things. Well, how much is that going to lower global temperatures? Well, maybe 0.5 degree, we don't really know. But how many trillions of dollars is this going to cost the American people? Well, that number is probably higher, maybe trillions, billions. It's going to be huge. So, we got to stop back and make a good plan. We need to be good stewards of the environment, but we can't have these radical government-led policies, because it's leading us into war and poverty. And we've seen that in Europe. Europe is a mess. Their economy is terrible. Germany is losing its manufacturing sector. Why? Because of bad energy policies. Heck, they closed down all the nuclear power plants, in the name of being anti-nuclear, but in the real world, guess what? That's the only non-greenhouse gas emission energy source in the world. So we've got to come back to common sense. I fear we've lost common sense. Sufficient reason. Ask reasonable questions. And if we do that, I think this country is going to make one of the biggest comebacks in history.
No, you were right about it. All right, next question, Phil. Talking to me about the oil markets for today's world events. Could you tell some details on the ups?
Yeah, global oil markets, obviously, the risk to supply is higher than it's been in 50 years. I've said that before. Risk premium goes on and goes off, right? I think we saw a big surge in oil prices, but because there was no major disruption of supply, a direct confrontation between Israel and Iran didn't happen. We took that off the board. And then the market got more worried about the impact of interest rates and inflation, and so we're pulling back a bit. But listen, you're in a global super cycle for oil and gas, right? And one of the things that I've been screaming about for the last 10 years, and now people are starting to wake up, is that we've been underinvesting in fossil fuels. Capital spending at the big oil majors has been way down. Nobody's looking for new sources of oil because everybody told us 5-10 years ago that we're not going to be using oil anymore. We're going to be using and driving electric cars. And this insanity has got to stop. And yeah, will oil go up at $10 and down $10 once in a while? Will it have big runs and breaks? Yeah, that's the oil market. Boom, bust, bust, boom. But big picture, you look at the trend, right? And the trend is higher. The trend's inflationary. The trend's taking more money out of your pocket. Cesar, your pocket. They're taking your money. They better stop it because I don't like that. You need your money, right? Or 20 or 30 years is a joke. There's no scientific evidence that says that can happen, you know? And even if you spend trillions and trillions of dollars, it's still like, you know, maybe it'll happen. And at what benefit? You know, the toxicity of building these electric cars means you have to drive them for hundreds of thousands of miles, you know, to have them to get broken even as far as, you know, reducing greenhouse gas emissions because of the way you have to build them, the strip mining, and then you have the power grid that you have to charge. It's going to be probably powered by natural gas or some other fuel if you're going to make this thing work. So this lunacy's got to stop. Now, I did say the Biden administration is talking about getting back into nuclear. That makes common sense. You know, nuclear power plants are safer than they've ever been. They're not perfect, but no energy source is. And if you really want to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, start building nuclear power plants. They don't have to be the big, huge ones, but you can start doing these plants. I think they're going to come in a big way. So, you know, the future is nuclear, right? And, you know, this is not your daddy's nuclear power plant. This is not 3 Mile Island. I mean, we learned a lot since then. And that's going to be the way forward.
Do you have any final thoughts about these issues in the world events and economics?
You know, listen, I mean, I'm at heart an optimist. I believe in America. I think we're going through some tough times. I think we've made some significant mistakes over the last couple of years, economically, militarily. I could go on and on and on, right? But from a larger issue, I have faith in the American people. They see what's going on. They're going to demand change. And I hope they stick to their guns because I think if we get a change, it's going to be good for everybody. We need a reawakening in this economy. I think it's going to happen. I think you're going to be a part of it, Cesar. You're going to see brighter days long after I'm gone, you know. So I think you have a lot to look forward to. So I'm very optimistic. So keep the faith. That's my recommendation.
Thanks, Phil.
All right, buddy. Thank you.
Thanks for coming with John Payne and Phil Flynn. Mike Castle. Well, folks, there are a podcast on the Markets Club. You can subscribe to Back Roads of Illinois on YouTube and whenever you are getting to your podcast. This podcast is produced by Back Roads of Illinois on YouTube and Rural Strong Media. Come for the Markets Club. I am Cesar Delgado. Have a good day.